I'll start recording. My name is Olga, and together with my colleague Karen, we're discussing a short story by a contemporary Russian author, Maxim Osipov. And we decided to change format a little bit today and start with a short presentation and then share our initial responses to and reactions to this story. And then we hope to have a lively discussion prompted by some of our questions. And now I think it will be even more lively because we have a translator with us, so we'll have an interesting input. Okay, so Karen, would you like to say anything, or should I go ahead with the presentation?
Yeah, you can, the presentation.
All right, so let me share my screen. All right, so let me start by talking a little bit about the author, Maxim Osipov. He was born on October 4th, 1963 in Moscow, where he graduated from a prestigious medical school. And he spent some time in this country as a research fellow at the University of California. And then upon returning to Russia, he founded a publishing house, Practicum, which published, for the most part, translation of medical books and guides. And then in 2005, he decided to return to practice medicine. He's a trained cardiologist, but he decided to return not to Moscow, but to a hospital in a small town 90 miles from Moscow called Tarusa. And even though it's a provincial city, it has an interesting intellectual history. And if Karen can share a link, I think Joshua Yafar does a good job in his article, kind of sketching out the history of this place. I'm not going to go into detail, or maybe I can share it later. And then, so Osipov starts working there as a cardiologist and finds the hospital in such a bad and terrible shape that he establishes a charitable foundation to support the hospital. And it's yet another story how many difficulties he had and still has to overcome, especially in dealing with the local authority and some of locals as well who consider this as his income and not as a charitable work. But it's another story that I'm not going to talk about right now. And so he made his literary debut in 2007 when he published his essay in English. It's In My Native Land. So it's his reminiscence of his time in Tarusa. And it was published in Russian journal Znamya. And since then, he became a recipient of several literary awards, and his books were translated into many European languages. And the most complete collection of his stories in English was published in 2019 by a New York Review of Books. And it won this Read Russia Award. And Svetlana Alexeyevich, a Belarusian writer and journalist and Nobel Prize winner, wrote a preface for this collection. Rock, Paper, Scissors and Other Stories received positive reviews from critics who called the book a cardiogram of Russian life and Osipov's new face of Russian literature. And Alexeyevich also praises Osipov's writing, and here are the quotes from this preface. And she sees him as someone who not only describes Russian everyday life in a way that also poses some philosophical questions about humanity and human life and existence. And so Osipov is sometimes, or there's this strong connection and desire to compare with another Russian author, Anton Chekhov, not only for being a doctor and not only for their shared love for short story, but also being very direct and tough, but also honest and caring and attentive, and taking to heart all these troubles that people are going through. And this is Osipov's motto: art is nothing but the self-development of truth. Stylistically, he is also continuing the tradition of great 19th century Russian literature in his attempt to depict everyday life, yet the most essential aspects of human existence. And I think I'll stop for now here to see what was your initial response to the story that we were reading, Cinderella #4. What is it about to you, and what is your reading of it?
So when you read this story, what were some kind of initial thoughts or feelings that came up for you? Just initially based on what you know about the times that we're in, and how Maxim Osipov decided to go about depicting this time.
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, so just going just through the initial read, what kind of feelings and thoughts were came up for you? Did you know that it was about this current COVID-19 pandemic era? And did that bring up any sorts of thoughts or feelings?
Sorry, I'm looking back at the English. Going back and forth, so let's see. Was there a COVID reference at the end?
Yeah, yes.
It's self-isolation, right? But and then at the end, that's right, coronavirus, yeah.
Say I started reading it like knowing it was set now because of the translator's note before it starts.
Mm-hmm.
True. Spoiler alert.
If I may, I read the whole. I can read a little bit in Russian, so I read the whole series, which is very short anyway. So I located the original. It's a bunch of stories. So one allusion that came to my mind was this reference to Cameron and Boccaccio in like telling stories in the time of the plague, because the other stories are also all of them talk about a man who either has it or wants it, the virus, or is fighting it or is dying, and then they all end in really kind of witty remarks to the readers like, oh, pass it on, or you will die, or you will get the virus or something. But what I think impressed me most is the witty narration, the witty self-reflexive narration. Yeah.
Has anyone read any other literary or non-literary explorations of the current COVID-19 experience through art?
This isn't a literary exploration. It's the Netflix series Social Distance.
Yes.
The events take place in April of 2020, which is very, it felt it felt very much of the similar genre to this this short piece, which seems written for the short COVID attention span too. There's something about the way that they engaged with behind the door with the COVID circumstances, you know, that was very much of the COVID age.
Say, in this story, this man was in isolation and he's reading this encyclopedia. And I'm like, my attention span, like right now, is nowhere near that long. Like, hats off to this fictional character.
Good point. I love the chain letter at the end. I mean, it's a chain story. And so I actually did text a link just to be safe to a friend of mine, you know, because I wanted them to live happily ever after, not get dysentery or coronavirus.
I'm glad to see Maxim's evil plan worked to get his work out there.
That's right. Good promotional move. Yeah.
Before we continue the conversation, we neglected to do introductions. Olga introduced herself, but I am Olga's colleague from the Slavic Reference Service at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and I'm a graduate assistant. And Maya, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm a non-traditional student late in life. So my name is Maya Larson. I'm a doctoral candidate in comparative literature at the University of Oregon. I'm looking at French philosophy and literature and Russian Aesopian texts. That's kind of like my focus. And so this was irresistible. I look at fables and Aesopian language, and I'm actually trying to see, is there anything Aesopian about this Osipov story?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for joining us. That's very wonderful to have this input. Nathan?
Yes, hi, I'm Nathan Sunshine. I'm a graduate student here at the University of Illinois, and I'm working as a graduate assistant for the Global Studies Department of the International Area Studies Library.
Thank you for joining us. And Boris, we have a special participant joining us.
I'm very sorry to crash your party. My name is Boris Traduk. I'm the translator of this story.
And Professor Vashkiv.
Oh boy, you don't have to call me that. I'll just Roman, and I'm a reader of that story. I'm excited. Can join.
So did anyone find it curious that the chain letter is something that's meant to be passed from person to person, something that's meant to be spread, was used in this story about contagion and virus? Do we feel like this was a productive or purposeful kind of format for the story?
That didn't even occur to me, sadly. I wish it had, of course. And I wonder what it says about literature, right? And is the viral nature of the spread of literature, and this ambivalence around something, you know, about language and literature. It can both, you know, it can both be the seat of communication and peace and civilization, and also gossip and miscommunication and disinformation. Something that I'm reading about in Aesop and his life, his Vita from the 2nd century CE in Rome, this ambivalence about language. And so this viral spread, you've got me thinking. That's a great question. Thank you.
I can add a little contextual detail, which is that these things began as posts on social media. So, and Maxim is very active on Facebook. And so the format of a social media post is another kind of virality. So that's something to keep in mind is the shareability of this thing is very much baked into the cake because it began life on a shareable platform.
Yeah, so there are so many ways that we can go into discussing. Before, I think going a little bit back to this question about other explorations of this pandemic that we're going through, there is actually a collection of short stories that was recently published, and Maxim Osipov's story is in it. Let me show you this one. Yeah, so and we came outside and saw the stars again, and they had some events that we missed, but there's still one happening in November where authors that collaborated on this collection gonna talk a little bit about how they see and how this pandemic affects their creativity. But I guess to yeah, continue with this question, if you experienced or in any form of art exploration of what's happening right now, maybe you could share with us. So Maya said she watched this Netflix. Anyone else have anything to share with us? I know Karen has a poem.
Should I share my screen or is that?
Yeah, I can share it.
Okay. So this is a poem that I found by Simon Armitage, and I thought that it might be productive to kind of compare and contrast two different COVID era works of literature, the chain letter series and this poem. I'll read it if that is all right. So this is called Lockdown. And I couldn't escape the waking dream of infected fleas and the warp and weft of soggy cloth by the tailor's hearth in ye old Eyam. Then couldn't unsee the boundary stone, that cockeyed dice with its 6 dark holes, thimbles brimming with vinegar wine, purging the plagued coins, which brought to mind the sorry story of Emmett Siddle and Roland Torr, star-crossed lovers on either side of the quarantine line, whose wordless courtship spanned the river till she came no longer, but slept again and dreamt this time of the exiled Yaksha sending word to his lost wife on a passing cloud, a cloud that followed an earthly map of camel trails and cattle tracks, streams like necklaces, fan-tailed peacocks, painted elephants, embroidered bedspreads of meadows and hedges, bamboo forests and snow-hatted peaks, waterfalls, creeks, the hieroglyphs of wide-winged cranes, and the glistening lotus flower after rain, the air, hypnotically see-through, rare, the journey a ponderous one at times, long and slow, but necessarily so. So this poem is an allusion to the event that took place in 1665 in a small English town of Eyam, in which a merchant who worked with cloth received a shipment from abroad that contained fleas that carried the plague. And the town not knowing what we know today about contagion, understood that this passed from person to person. So the town collectively decided to close their borders, and they did not let anyone in and they did not let anyone out, which was kind of the tragedy, and many people perished. And this contemporary writer, Simon Armitage, has decided to kind of call upon this historical event that happened, in which one town made a great sacrifice in an attempt to contain the plague. How do we feel like this poem compares with Maxim Osipov's short story? Do we see any striking similarities or differences? Or maybe another question might be, how does the kind of mythologized history we have with plague and contagion impact or inform the way that we understand our current circumstances that we're all in?
I would say to answer the first part of your question, Armitage is actually a person with a great sense of humor, but he seems to withhold much of that humor in this poem. He takes the subject quite seriously. There's still a lightness in some of his formal choices. I think the final line is, it's a wonderful rhyme with slow and necessarily so, which almost has a kind of a playful tone to it. But it's a very serious poem nonetheless. And I think that Maxim's approach is far lighter, and especially in this particular story. Not all the stories are free of grotesquerie and rather serious consequences. But this one is a fairly light one. Everyone gets off pretty much unscathed. But you're right. I think it's a good observation that they're both pulling on literary history and the history of plagues to make sense of the moment in writing. In Maxim's case, it's the fairy tale of Cinderella and any number of allusions to literature of both the Russian and the Western traditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thank you for bringing up the very title of the Maxim story, Cinderella. How do we do you think that was a purposeful choice to kind of have that allusion to fairy tales and the plague? Like, I guess, how do we imagine the era of the plague in Europe, and how that has to do with fairy tales, and how that has to do with the way that we kind of have contextualized our current experiences?
I'm not sure if this directly speaks to it. It's kind of that scattered COVID brain kind of way of responding. But thinking now about Cinderella and these sisters who kept this one sister from the ball. She was kind of sequestered, kind of like locked down, and no balls for her, and yet something sneaked out. Right, she was able to somehow make it happen. There was something in Osipov's story. Right? There's still some sort of connection. And then leaping to the shareability of that, like there's just behind the door, they were able to kind of communicate even through a knock, and that the shareability, as Boris pointed out, the shareability of that story is kind of written or baked into that cake, as he said. In this case, this is about kind of non-shareability, or the word that can't get through, right? So it's lockdown without communication, and so there might be a different kind of lockdown that's being spoken to here versus the one in Osipov's story. Those are thoughts that come to mind in response to your questions.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
So it's almost like the woman who is delivering him food isn't the Cinderella. It's almost like he's the Cinderella, like he's the one who's trapped in a situation, and he's projecting all his hopes on somebody else, not a prince, but this woman he doesn't know who's bringing him food.
Mhm. Between this poem, Lockdown, and the Chain Letters series, uh, which do you feel kind of has more accurately articulated the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, and why?
May I chime in?
Of course.
That's an excellent question, and I think it depends entirely on one's personal experience of this pandemic. I think that it's always dangerous to write about deadly serious matters, quite literally, matters of life and death, with a light touch. It's a risk to do it, but a great many people have, even those who have had brushes with disaster during this period, um, have also felt the absurdity of it, and have, I'm sure, reflected in their own hearts on how really strange the situation is, and all of the strange things that it's introduced into our lives, including these endless Zoom meetings. So the new things that have come along with this pandemic that aren't life and death matters, are worthy of not necessarily ridicule, but of light treatment and light consideration. So I think what I really like about this series is that Maxim took a big risk in writing about it with such a light touch, and it certainly is a part of what we're all dealing with, this sense of absurdity.
Mhm. Yeah.
I have a question if there are any plans to translate the rest stories in the series.
Yes, so so far we've done two, and one has appeared in an anthology. This one is online, and the other stories are very, very good. And I think he stopped. So I think this is he's finished with the cycle. It was published as a whole. So I would love to translate more of them, and probably will. It looks like COVID's going to be with us for some time, so there's no particular rush. But we are working on a second collection of his very serious work, and that will appear probably in 2022 from NYRB Classics. I don't think this series will appear in that collection because it really does stand apart from the mainstream of his writing.
Does knowing that Maxim is a medical professional change the way that anyone feels about the story?
Well, the fact that he was a cardiologist, he is sorry, a cardiologist, kind of maybe really home in on the percussive, the heartbeat, the beating, the rhythm. So I wondered about how that played in. Um, yeah, so that did, and it also kind of made me like think about, besides Chekhov, Bulgakov, um, is there anything Bulgakovian happening, in this? Now going through Heart of a Dog, and that kind of satirical spirit of the Master and Margarita. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a question.
Yeah.
I think that's very perceptive. I think Bulgakov definitely is more a more sure touchstone for this series than Chekhov. Although of course Chekhov did write some very funny things, but I do think that the kind of dark satire is Bulgakovian more than it is Chekhovian here.
How do we feel about if we take a moment to just analyze a particular line, how do we feel about the very last line of the story? People die of other things, you know. Did anyone have any thoughts about that ending?
I don't want to dominate. I just want to ask a follow up to that. Does anyone has anyone had that kind of thought throughout this whole uh, unfolding catastrophe that we're facing? That yes, of course, it's, you know, we're all worried about this one virus, but life goes on, and life is full of death, and there are so many other things that could take us out at any moment. Um, a kind of restored perspective is what I see in that line, a restoration of perspective that yes, this is all very horrible and very new for us in this lifetime, but we're still dealing with all of the other uh, terrible things that could disrupt our lives.
I think that's exactly it. And for me, that's what this whole story felt like. When you read a story, stories have beginnings, they have middles, they have ends. Like there's sort of this other place where everything has a structure and something will happen, you know. Whereas in reality, it really doesn't always feel like that. It's just sort of, oh, we're in this new crazy circumstance and we don't really know what's happening. And, you know, some people we know might not survive, but like at the end of the day, like there will be an end to this story. And, you know, I hadn't even really thought about it that much until reading the story. Like, oh yeah, like it will end. And this will be, you know, in the future, it will be a story.
And I think there is where the medical experience comes in, I think, because Maxim has dealt with so many critical cases in his life, things that have ended well and many things that have not, that he naturally understands that, you know, you do move on, and these horrible things that seem endless, they do end, and then you think of them in the form of stories.
Mhm. I think that many people are having a hard time writing about COVID because, um, you know, the kind of moral hasn't presented itself yet because it hasn't ended. We're still in it. So it's hard to kind of say anything that feels profound, um, because there's not, we don't know how it ends. So we don't know how to interpret that ending yet. But I found the whole, the kind of what was brought up about, yeah, like where we put our attention, and the kind of the fake news and the chain letters, and I think we should talk a little bit about so it says, quote, "If you share this story with your friends, our heroes will live happily ever after like Cinderella and her prince. But if you don't, they are sure to perish of tetanus, say, or maybe Shigella infection." So this line kind of plays with ideas of superstition and magical thinking, the kind of the magical thinking that comes along with anxiety, where you feel like, oh, my thoughts might have the power to change reality, and the chain letter experience of, I'm pretty sure that forwarding this email will not be the thing that keeps, my mother from dying, but just in case, I might just forward it. So how do we feel like this, if anyone feels comfortable sharing their own personal experiences with COVID-19 and how the kind of like shareability of the virus, the shareability of news about COVID has kind of informed the way that you read this story?
Well, going back to the talk about death, and mortality, right? I think about this book, Advice for Future Corpses by Sally Tisdale, Advice for Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them is the full title. There's that element, but at the same time, my communications with people have kind of shifted, not just in terms of how we communicate, right, by Zoom or furtive, talks in a park, 10, 12 feet apart with masks, because I'm OCD. It's also kind of divided us between those who don't really think that this is serious and those who do. And I kind of map that on those who really believe that we'll die and those who haven't quite completely accepted that fact. Well, we're not, it's, people die, but just not me or those I love. It's really not real. And COVID is kind of like that medium of having that position. I'm seeing that, and with communications with people. So I don't know if that addresses what you were talking about, but the shareability or like not, or like how you communicate about this thing and whether people are able to really communicate about the fact that we're going to die, which is what we're saying when we say you could get COVID. So I've had some divisions personally, that my 9-year-old daughter, like, she's going online, but she has some classmates. We decided not to be in their bubble or pod, where they'll go just these chosen people, the 6 kids, they'll be in someone's house and learn in person because it's really important. But we didn't want to join the pod. We take mortality too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. That's I very much appreciate your sharing that. And you said that you're a little OCD. I'm very OCD. And one of the funniest tweets that I saw in the very early days, before we had much concrete information, especially reliable information about COVID, one of the tweets from a comedian was, um, you know, uh, my therapist, washing your hands 19 times a day is an expression of obsessions and compulsions. The government, wash your hands 19 times a day or your dad will die. So of course there's a little cognitive dissonance for people who are already obsessive, already very conscious of death. And for them, this may be an even, more difficult experience than it is for people who, as you say, are not so, don't take mortality quite as seriously at all hours. And that is a very real divide. I think that is a very real divide. But maybe taking mortality seriously doesn't necessarily entail being obsessed with death. And finding that balance is very difficult, and we've all been asked to find that balance.
It's tough. Now that you talk about sanity, it's tough that we must, to save our lives, do something that is like pathological by the book, constantly wash your hands, or your dad will die. You get the Freudian thing there, right? But yeah, no, it's just funny that it works out that way, and it just maps onto my earlier just observation since 2016 that the things they ask you when they want to make sure in the hospital that you really are sane are, who's the president of the United States? And boy, he's the map of, he's the indicator of our sanity. Wow. And so now we have to wash our hands a lot and say that Donald Trump is our president. It's just, this is madness.
Thank you for sharing that meme. I think that is so poignant and funny. I too have some OCD, and I remember, opening doorknobs, like this, and that used to make me, that used to be a manifestation of my obsessive compulsive tendencies, but now it's just rational. And that's something that's very, interesting. I don't know what else to say about it.
Except now you should take the sweater off and put a different one on afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, burn that sweater. I hope to never see that sweater again. No, I think dealing with all of this dissonance is precisely what Maxim I think is trying to do through humor, because humor is like that tweet. Humor is a very valuable expression of confusion. It's a way of sorting through the absurdity of life, and so this is what when I first received these stories, that's what I immediately recognized as this is a lifeline. It's a way of dealing with some of that inherent confusion.
Mm-hmm. And the added layer of the fake news, where you don't know quite the reality of the situation, because depending on who you ask and what kind of side of the internet that you mentally exist in, you might have a completely different understanding. And how do you feel that the story was a commentary on the fake news layer of this experience?
Oh, the whole cycle. I think I don't want to put words in Maxim's mouth, but I think he would agree that at least partly the whole cycle was inspired by the spread of fake news. And the first story that I translated, the first story he wrote in this cycle is very much about a person who does not believe that this is any worse than the flu. And of course, the no worse than the flu is one of the first pernicious memes to spread about this thing. And so it's a story about a man who acts first motivated by severe fear of death, but also this blustery and perhaps pathological belief in fake news. And the two things work out in a surprising way. He does survive, but it is not everyone is as lucky. So it's a very much a commentary on fake news. I think that at some point Maxim came to appreciate the variety of fake stories that were being spread, and so the stories that he continued to write were all in one way or another inspired by the narratives coming out of the virus. He was watching the tea leaves and seeing what kind of narratives were going to emerge, and I think he was pretty prescient. A lot of these stories are the stories that we hear. This is a perfect example of the kind of last 5 minutes of the evening news human interest story about people meeting cute, during current COVID times. This is one of the ways that I think we're all making sense of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your insight. This is wonderful. Olga, do you have any kind of final questions?
Well, I guess going back to that last line, it made me smile, I think, when I was reading it, because I was thinking that almost all my conversations with people I meet while walking on streets with my child are, well, they're all around this pandemic, and I think that's the way they usually end. Like, well, yes, people are dying from all sorts of things, and I guess, but the thing is, what's different is usually, I think, you experience it on your personal level. It's like within your family or your friends, but here it's like, yes, there's this thing that it's like dividing us, like mask, no mask, and real and not real. But then there's also thing that we like as humanity going through this together, and yeah, and I guess I was also I think struck by how attentive to details Maxim Osipov is, and some of this. And on one hand, there are no names, like we don't know the names of the heroes, but then at least in Russian version, we know the name of the encyclopedia he was reading, and there's also this Cinderella. So I guess my general question is, are there any details that struck you most while reading this story? And why do you think the heroes don't have names?
So I'll give that a shot. That's an interesting question. I don't think this totally addresses it, but why the heroes don't have names? It's almost like we are standing in there, like it's us, it's like a placeholder. So it's kind of us in that story in some ways, or some possibility. Yeah, that's where I go with that. I also I don't know if I should jump to the other thing we were talking about just right before this, with the fake news and the question of how this might be different, like what's happening now. And one thing that I kind of think about when I think about fake news in this context and the way the virus was first presented as a flu, as Boris pointed out with that first meme about it's just a flu, is Death in Venice. That it's the misinformation campaign. Oh, everything's okay. Keep spending your money. Tourists, come on over. That's not, it's nothing. Party, as people are dying. And then that caused more people to die. So that's part of it. That's kind of an aspect of this that's more serious. That isn't, that's part of the misinformation. Flu and misinformation seem to go together, cover up.
And I would also say that I very much like all of the details that I had to exclude by necessity from the English translation. The Brockhaus and Ephron Encyclopedia is a perfect touch because it places this man's intellectual life in the pre-revolutionary period. That he's very much a continuation of the long tradition of the Russian intellectual, but it also focuses our attention on what happened between 1916 and 1918. 1917 happened, and that was itself a kind of disaster. Many people were locked up in their homes, hoping that it would blow over too. So it points to other catastrophes of the past, and I like very much what Olga said. So many of the relationships in Osipov stories, both in these comical stories and in his very serious stories, are formed over matters of culture. So it's music that brings people together. It's reading that brings people together. And here we see a reflex of that it's the bond between these people, this mutual understanding, is formed on the basis of culture. So that too is a kind of suggestion of the thing that will save us, is what we can't give up. It's this attachment to culture, that it is one of the only comforts we have left, and one of the only bridges we can rely on.
Any final closing remarks that anyone would like to share?
Just wondering about that quote from Pasternak that Boris you shared with me. I don't know if I don't dare to pronounce it in Russian, but I wonder how it impinges on this, and then it's a nice parting, right? So I won't say it in Russian, but my Google Translate version is, and then our ends and the soil and fate breathe. That was the Pasternak poem, the line that is.
Yes, that's right. And so at the very end of the Russian poem, in the Russian version of the poem, you have Почки и судьба, which is an allusion to Pasternak, who has in place of Почки and судьба, почва и судьба. And почва means, of course, native soil or soil. And here he changes it to Почки, which means kidneys. So it's this. It's obviously a nice little parody. But that's lost in translation because, of course, the words for soil especially in this kind of metaphysical soil, and kidneys are not that close. So to compensate for it, I introduced other puns, kidneys kinder, liver livelier, and that was a form of compensation for the lost humor of this reference.
Thank you for that.
I think I also have a short question to Badis. Where this number in the title comes from? It's not in Russian version.
It's bad design, I think. So the idea is that Cinderella is the title of the story, and this is number 4 of the series of chain letters.
Okay.
So but actually, I was reflecting on this. It works really well because she is the Cinderella of this story is one woman who is working for an organization called Cinderella. So she could very well be the 4th woman in this organization, the 4th Cinderella. And so that too is it works very well. The misreading is productive. And there you have, if you're going to hunt for allusions to the contemporary political situation, there you have a very good one, that this organization is considered a foreign agent in the Russian Federation. And of course, Cinderella is a kind of foreign agent. It's a foreign fairy tale. Yeah.
Thank you. Wow, I have to think on that. Yes, thank you. Interesting. If I quote you, may I quote? I may be referencing a little bit in my conclusion of a dissertation. I hope it's okay if I could quote. I could send you something to verify it, or just as Boris said.
I'm very easy to find. Absolutely. Okay. Go ahead. Yes, I'm very easy to find.
Okay, great.
I have a WordPress. You can just cut
okay, great. Thank you for that.
Thank you. This has been such a joy. Thank you all for allowing me to chime in.
Well, thank you. You definitely enriched our understanding of the story and reading, and yeah, it was great to have you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will have a November international discussion where we will try to find a equally interesting story to discuss. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks.
Thank you.